I remember the exact day I truly felt lonely. It wasn't when I retired. It wasn't when my children moved away. It wasn't even when my spouse passed. No, it was the day I realized no one was expecting me anymore. No phone calls asking for advice, no invitations to dinner, no urgent "Dad, can you help me with this?" Just silence. I sat in my chair, staring at the same four walls, wondering when life had become so quiet. At first, I told myself, maybe this is just how it is after 70. But then the days started blending together. Morning coffee, an afternoon nap, watching the evening news, then another night alone. And the worst part? No one even noticed. I wasn't just alone, I felt invisible. I'd smile at the grocery store cashier, hoping for a little conversation, but they were too busy scanning items. I'd wave at my neighbor, but they were always in a rush. It felt like the world was moving forward while I was standing still, watching from the sidelines, fading into the background. And that was when the hardest question settled in my mind. Is this how the rest of my life is going to be? Before starting my story, I'd really appreciate it if you liked this video. It helps me keep sharing more important lessons. If you haven't subscribed yet, I highly recommend hitting the subscribe button and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. Also, if you enjoy this video, please comment 1. If you don't, comment 0 so I know how to improve. Now, let's get started. Loneliness isn't just about being alone. It's about feeling unseen, unheard, like you've become an afterthought in a world that once revolved around you. It's waking up in the morning and realizing there's no one waiting for you, no plans to look forward to, no real reason to get dressed for the day. The silence in the house isn't peaceful, it's heavy. It carries echoes of laughter that once filled these rooms, of voices that no longer call your name. And as the days stretch on, loneliness doesn't just sit beside you, it seeps into you. It dulls your spirit, drains your energy, and makes you question your worth. But here's what no one warns you about. Loneliness isn't always loud. Sometimes, it hides behind routine. You might see people at the grocery store, exchange pleasantries at church, even have a casual chat with a neighbor. But if those interactions never go beyond the surface, if you never feel truly connected to anyone, the loneliness remains. You can be surrounded by people and still feel like you're standing alone in a crowded room. That's the kind of loneliness that lingers, the kind that makes you feel like you're watching life from the outside, unable to step back in. And then, slowly, it starts to change you. Your motivation slips. You start thinking, why bother? Why bother cooking a nice meal if no one's around to share it? Why bother going for a walk if there's no one waiting for you when you return? You begin to withdraw, not because you want to, but because you've convinced yourself that no one would notice if you did. And the more you pull away, the harder it becomes to reach out again. But here's what loneliness doesn't tell you. It whispers lies. It tells you that no one cares, that no one would miss you, that you don't matter anymore. But that is not the truth. The truth is, connection is still possible. Love is still possible. Joy is still possible. But the first step is realizing that loneliness doesn't define you. It's a feeling, not a fact. And no matter how deep in it you feel, there's always a way back, to warmth, to belonging, to life. The question is, are you willing to take that first step? But loneliness isn't just an emotional ache, it has real effects on our health, too. What most people don't realize is that isolation doesn't just weigh on the heart, it wears down the body. It creeps in slowly, chipping away at health in ways that aren't always obvious at first. At 77, I've learned that doctors will check your blood pressure, your cholesterol, your sugar levels, but they rarely ask how often you laugh, how many conversations you've had this week, or when was the last time someone held your hand. And yet, those things matter. Studies have shown that chronic loneliness is as harmful as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It raises the risk of heart disease, weakens the immune system, and even speeds up cognitive decline. The brain, like a muscle, needs exercise, stimulation, conversation, and interaction to stay sharp. Without it, thoughts become sluggish, memories start slipping, and the spark that once kept you engaged with life begins to fade. But it doesn't stop there. Loneliness fuels stress, and stress is a silent killer. When you're alone too often, your body produces more cortisol, the stress hormone that raises blood pressure, weakens the heart, and drains energy. Over time, that stress doesn't just leave you feeling exhausted, it makes you more vulnerable to illness. That's why so many older adults who are isolated experience more frequent colds, higher rates of inflammation, and even slower recovery from injuries. It's not just about feeling lonely, it's about what loneliness does to the body, breaking it down little by little. I've seen it happen. I've watched once vibrant friends begin to withdraw, their enthusiasm dimming, their health deteriorating, not because they were sick, but because they had no reason to fight. And then there's the toll it takes on the mind. Research has shown that chronic loneliness significantly increases the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's. The brain needs conversation, challenge, and connection to stay alive. Without them, clarity fades. I remember a man I used to talk to at the community center, sharp as a whip, always ready with a joke. But after his wife passed, he stopped coming. A year later, when I saw him again, he barely recognized me. That's what loneliness does. It steals time, it steals connection, it steals life. But here's the truth, loneliness doesn't have to win. It feels like an ending, but it doesn't have to be. It's a battle, yes, but one that can be fought. And the solution isn't in a pill or a prescription, it's in people, in community, in reaching out even when it feels hard. Because the greatest cure for loneliness isn't medicine, it's connection. Small steps can create big changes. The day everything changed wasn't anything extraordinary, no grand event, no sudden revelation. It was just another ordinary afternoon, like the countless ones before it. I was sitting alone in a cafe, my usual spot by the window, staring at my coffee as it grew cold. Outside, the world moved at its usual pace, people rushing to and from work, chatting with friends, living their lives. And there I was, just watching, feeling like a ghost among the living. That's when it happened. A woman, probably close to my age, sat at the table next to me. She caught my eye and smiled. "Isn't it nice to just sit and enjoy a quiet moment?" she said. I don't know why, but I answered. "It is," I said, my voice almost unfamiliar to me after so many days of silence. And just like that, we were talking. About nothing in particular, the weather, the taste of the coffee, the way life used to be when people weren't always staring at their phones. But for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. It was a simple conversation, no more than 10 minutes, but it stayed with me much longer. Because in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't the only one who was lonely. That small exchange became a turning point. If a brief conversation could brighten my day, how many others were waiting for the same thing? So the next time I went out, I made a small effort. I smiled at the barista, asked my neighbor how they were doing, even struck up a conversation with a stranger at the park. At first, it felt unnatural, almost forced. But then, little by little, I felt the loneliness start to loosen its grip. I had been waiting for connection to find me, but I realized it had been there all along. I just had to take the first step. And that's the thing about small steps. They build momentum. At first, they seem insignificant, too small to make a difference. But just like a single drop of water starts a ripple across a still pond, one small act of connection can begin to change everything. I didn't see it at first, but each little moment, each conversation, each smile, each decision to engage instead of retreat was rewiring my mind. The loneliness that once felt like an unbearable weight started to lift, little by little, with every step I took. I remember one particular day when I truly understood just how much had changed. I was sitting on a park bench, enjoying the crisp air, when a woman about my age sat down next to me. A few months earlier, I would have kept my eyes on the ground, afraid to speak, worried I'd be bothering her. But that day, something inside me had shifted. Instead of staying silent, I turned to her and said, "Beautiful day, isn't it?" She smiled and nodded. That was all it took. A few minutes later, we were deep in conversation, talking about our families, our pasts, even laughing about the quirks of growing older. Before she left, she patted my hand and said, "I'm so glad we talked today. I don't get out much, and sometimes I feel invisible." Her words struck me. Here I was, thinking I was the only one feeling lonely, when in reality, so many people around me were struggling with the same thing. That's when I understood the truth. Loneliness isn't something we escape from alone. The way out is through connection, through reaching out, through choosing, again and again, to take small steps toward people instead of away from them. Looking back, I see now that the hardest part was getting started. The fear of rejection, the awkwardness, the thought that I didn't belong, it almost kept me locked in my own isolation. But once I took that first step, I saw the world respond. People smiled back. Conversations happened. Invitations started coming. And most importantly, I felt something shift inside me. I no longer felt invisible. If you're sitting in that same place I was, feeling trapped in loneliness, I want you to know this. You don't have to make a huge change overnight. Just take one small step. Say hello. Make eye contact. Ask a question. Because those small steps, they lead to big changes. And before you know it, you'll find yourself stepping back into life again. 2. Technology is a bridge, not a barrier. At first, I resisted technology. I told myself it wasn't for me, that it belonged to the younger generation, not an old man who still preferred reading the newspaper with his morning coffee. I had spent most of my life without smartphones, social media, or video calls, so why start now? I convinced myself I didn't need it, that I was fine the way things were. But the truth was, the world had changed, and I was being left behind. I missed my family. I missed the sound of laughter filling the house. I missed the feeling of being part of something, even from a distance. And then, one day, my granddaughter said something that stuck with me. She looked up from her phone and said, "Grandpa, you don't have to be alone. We're all right here. You just have to meet us where we are." That was the moment I decided to give technology a chance. Not because I suddenly wanted to be tech savvy, but because I didn't want to feel so far away from the people I loved. It started small, like everything else, learning how to send a text message, figuring out how to answer a video call. The first time my daughter called me on FaceTime, I nearly dropped the phone when I saw her face appear on the screen. It felt like magic. Suddenly, she wasn't just a voice on the other end. She was right there, smiling, her eyes full of warmth. And then my grandson popped into the frame, waving excitedly. "Grandpa, look at my new Lego set," he said, holding it up for me to see. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just technology. This was a bridge. A bridge that could connect me to the people I loved, no matter how far away they were. As I got more comfortable, I started exploring more. My granddaughter helped me create a Facebook account, and before I knew it, I was reconnecting with old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. I joined a group for seniors who shared my interests: reading, history, even gardening. Suddenly, I was having conversations with people all over the country, sharing stories, learning, laughing. The world that had once felt so small was opening up again, all because I had taken a chance on something new. And I won't lie, there were challenges. I fumbled with buttons, sent messages to the wrong people, and once accidentally posted a grocery list instead of a comment on a friend's page. But every mistake was worth it. Because now, I don't just sit in silence waiting for someone to knock on my door. I reach out. I send messages. I join video calls. Technology didn't replace real connection, it made it possible. So if you're afraid of it, like I was, I urge you to take that first step. Let someone teach you. Learn a little at a time. Because the world isn't as far away as it seems. Sometimes, all it takes is the press of a button to remind you that you were never truly alone. 3. Giving is the fastest way to receive. After reconnecting with people through technology, something inside me awakened. I was no longer as isolated as before, but something was still missing. Conversations were nice, and seeing my family's faces on a screen brought me joy, but at the end of the day, I still felt like I wasn't needed. And that, I realized, was the root of my loneliness. It wasn't just about having people to talk to, it was about having a purpose. I wanted to feel useful again, to contribute, to matter. That's when I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I gave my time to others. It started simply. A friend mentioned that the local library needed volunteers to read to children once a week. I hesitated. What could an old man like me offer? Would they even care about what I had to say? But then I thought about all the stories I had read to my own kids, the bedtime tales that once filled my house with warmth. So, I signed up. The first time I sat in front of those children with a book in my hands, something happened. Their little faces lit up, eyes wide, hanging on to every word. They laughed at the funny parts, gasped at the surprises, and when the story ended, one of them tugged on my sleeve and asked, "Can you read another one?" In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt needed. I felt important. That small act of giving, just 1 hour a week, turned into something bigger. Soon, I was helping at the food pantry, sorting cans and chatting with other volunteers. Then I found myself mentoring a young man who had lost his grandfather and needed guidance. Before I knew it, my days were full again. Not because I was busy, but because I was giving. And the most surprising part? The more I gave, the more I received in return. I found friendships where I least expected them, in the laughter of a child, in the shared work of stacking food boxes, in the quiet gratitude of someone whose burden had been lightened. Giving didn't drain me, it filled me. It reminded me that no matter my age, I still had something to offer. And that's what I want others to understand. Loneliness disappears when you focus on others instead of yourself. So if you're feeling empty, don't wait for someone to come to you. Go out and give. Because in giving, you don't just help others, you rediscover yourself. 4. A new chapter is always possible. With each act of giving, I felt more alive than I had in years. But something even more profound happened. I started to see myself differently. I wasn't just an old man waiting for life to pass by. I was someone who still had value, someone who could still learn, grow, and yes, even start over. That was a realization I never expected. For so long, I had believed that new beginnings belonged to the young, that by the time you reached a certain age, life was about maintaining, not expanding. But I was wrong. A new chapter is always possible, no matter how many pages have already been written. I discovered this truth one afternoon at the library. A woman, probably in her early 70s, was telling a friend about an art class she had just joined. I always wanted to paint, she said, laughing, but I was too busy living life to try. That sentence hit me like a wave. Too busy living life to try. It made me think, how many things had I put off? How many dreams had I tucked away, believing they were no longer meant for me? That night, I sat down and made a list. Things I had once wanted to do. Things I had convinced myself were for younger people. Things I thought I had missed my chance on. And then, I picked one, learning to play the piano. I had always admired musicians, always wished I had taken lessons when I was younger. And then I thought, why not now? So, with trembling fingers, I signed up for a beginner's class at the community center. At first, I felt foolish. Sitting there with a group of other seniors, plunking out simple notes, I almost laughed at myself. What am I doing? I thought. Is this ridiculous? But then something incredible happened. I started enjoying it. Week after week, my hands became steadier, my confidence grew, and before long, I could play simple songs. It wasn't about becoming great at it. It was about proving to myself that growth never stops, that joy can be found in new places, that the heart never truly ages. That's the lesson I want to share. It's never too late. Not to learn something new. Not to make a new friend. Not to fall in love again. Not to create a life that excites you. Your story isn't over just because you've lived many chapters. In fact, some of the best ones may still be ahead. All you have to do is turn the page. Looking back on my journey, I see now that loneliness was never meant to be a permanent state. It was just a season, a visitor that stayed longer than it should have. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. We all have the power to change our own story. No matter how many years have passed, no matter how much we've lost, no matter how long we've been isolated, the possibility of connection, of purpose, of joy, is still within reach. The hardest part is believing that for yourself. I know what it feels like to think it's too late, to assume the best moments of life are behind you, to convince yourself that people have moved on, that the world no longer has a place for you. But that's just loneliness speaking, whispering lies into your heart. The truth is, you are still here. You are still capable of love, of laughter, of learning, of starting again. Your presence matters more than you know. There is someone out there who needs you, whether it's a stranger in a cafe, a child at the library, a neighbor who's just as lonely as you once were. Someone is waiting for you to take that first step. So let me ask you this. What will your first step be? Maybe it's picking up the phone and calling an old friend. Maybe it's walking into a community event, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. Maybe it's learning how to use FaceTime so you can see your grandchildren's faces more often. Or maybe it's simply saying hello to someone today, because you never know whose life you might brighten with that small act of kindness. I can tell you from experience, one small step leads to another. And before you know it, you're living again instead of just existing. You're laughing, you're connecting, you're finding joy in the simple moments. You're remembering that you are not invisible, that you are not forgotten, that life still has beautiful surprises waiting for you. If no one has told you this in a while, let me be the one to say it. You matter. Your story isn't over. The world still needs your wisdom, your kindness, your presence. And the next chapter of your life? It's waiting for you to turn the page. So take that first step, because I promise you, life is still worth reaching for. It's your turn now. You've heard my story. You've walked with me through the loneliness, the small steps, the rediscovery of purpose, and the realization that life is still waiting. But none of this matters unless you decide, right here, right now, that you won't let loneliness define you anymore. The choice is in your hands. No one is coming to knock on your door and pull you back into the world. You have to take that first step yourself. And I truly know, how hard that first step feels. But I also know this, it is worth it. Every time. So what will you do? Will you reach out to an old friend you haven't spoken to in years? Will you step outside, take a deep breath, and remind yourself that the world is still full of beauty? Will you finally learn how to use that smartphone your kids keep telling you about so you can see their faces instead of just hearing their voices? Will you volunteer your time, your wisdom, your kindness to someone who desperately needs it? Will you dare to believe that you are still capable of joy, laughter, and connection? I challenge you, yes, you, to pick just one thing. One action. One small step that you can take today. Maybe it's something as simple as smiling at a stranger in the grocery store or striking up a conversation with someone at the coffee shop. Maybe it's signing up for a class, attending a local event, or just saying yes the next time someone invites you somewhere. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be something. Because here's the truth, life isn't over after 60, 70, or even 80. It only ends when you stop reaching for it. And I promise you, if you take that step, if you reach out, if you open yourself up again, you will be amazed at how life responds. New friendships, new experiences, new joy will start finding their way to you. So don't wait. Not for the perfect moment, not for someone else to take the lead. The time is now. Right now. This is your life, and it is still unfolding. And the next beautiful, unexpected, joyful chapter? It's waiting for you. So tell me, what will your first step be? Because I can't wait to hear how your story continues. Thank you for following us till the end. Don't forget to show some love by clicking the like button and subscribe. This supports the channel and allows me to continue creating content for you. Leave your thoughts or comments below. Feel free to express yourself and stay positive. See you next time.